I'd like to introduce Patty. I'm going to mispronounce this, Protapis.
Yes.
Close, okay, close enough, yeah. She's a board member, and she's going to introduce Charlie tonight. So I hope you enjoy it. Generally, after a presentation, we have some question and answers after, and so we'll do that too. So thanks.
Great. So on behalf of the Door County Environmental Council, thank you for being here tonight, here in person, and those of you that are online. Welcome. One of the things that we value at the Door County Environmental Council is to understand the connections between healthy waters, changing ecosystems, and the future of the resources we all depend upon. Tonight's program, the legendary Lake Whitefish and the apex predator Lake Trout, explores a fascinating story happening right here in the Great Lakes. While whitefish populations have surged in Green Bay, they've declined in other parts of Lake Michigan. A reminder that our aquatic systems are complex and constantly changing. At the same time, Lake Trout are showing encouraging signs of recovery. Our speaker tonight, Charlie Henriksen, brings a truly unique perspective. Charlie came to Door County from Chicago as a young man and quickly was captivated by the knowledge and traditions of local fishermen. That interest grew into a lifelong career as a commercial fisherman. For more than 50 years, Charlie has not only made a living on these waters, he has worked to understand and protect them. He has served in leadership roles within the commercial fishing community and collaborated with organizations including UW Stevens Point, UW Green Bay, Wisconsin DNR, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Wisconsin Sea Grant on important Great Lakes research, to name a few. Charlie has witnessed enormous changes from invasive species and shifting fish populations to the impacts of climate change. His message is one that is essential. Please join me in welcoming Charlie.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody. This is an impressive group here. I'm happy to talk to you, and while I'm not as much of a scientific expert as I might be, I've certainly lived these changes. I have a really good friend here in the audience, Jim Legault, who I met early in my career when I was working as a crewman back in 1970. Throughout the Great Lakes, he published a book called Reflections in a Tarnished Mirror that was a great history of the early part of the fishing. And he's had photo exhibits at both the Wisconsin Maritime Museum in Manitowoc. He's done work at the Death Store Maritime Museum, and has been a great friend to the fishery for a long time. The other person that I was happy to see here tonight is Rob Cole, who was in the state Senate when so much of the legislation that created commercial fishing regulations that we do by now is all in play, and he was a great friend. Him and his staff were always knowledgeable. And I'll never forget the one time we stood in the hallway, and I said, they said they do this, and he said to me, "Can we trust them?" And you all know what we're talking about. Anyway, I just got to mention that. It was not part of what I was going to say. Since Patty and Kathy's help gave me half my speech with that introduction. I had to put some time.
You know, as you speak up a little bit louder, the people that are online say it's a little bit too low on the volume.
That's usually not been a problem in my life. I've always been loud. I coach sports. I work on a boat, so you have to be loud. So,
Go ahead.
I got a very explicit email a few days ago from Mike that told me to come early so we could test the microphone. Obviously, we forgot that, but yeah, thank you. And don't be afraid to speak up if I start failing again. But the dynamic changes that whitefish have made in the last 10 to 15 years are just amazing to anyone who's been around them. The invasive quagga mussels completely changed the environment in the lake, which you're all aware of. It started with the zebra mussels, but the zebra mussels are really the only invasive that has disappeared of all the ones that came into the Great Lakes, and that's because the quagga mussels overtook all of the suitable environment for mussels. And the quagga mussels don't seem to have any temperature or depth restriction. The entire lake bed is covered with quagga mussels. So it's changed a lot. But whitefish, who I've often referred to as the most adaptable animal in nature, has reinvented itself. It's recolonized Lower Green Bay. It's spawning in the rivers. It hasn't been identified, but there's just more fish being produced in the bay than the rivers could possibly support with the habitat that's in the rivers. So they've just made this amazing change, and it's very likely because it would be just too much of a coincidence to think that the PCB cleanup in the bay didn't contribute to that. You know, that the bay is in better shape. The other thing, though, and it's kind of at odds with some of what everyone is concerned about, is the nutrient level in the bay remains high, despite mussels also being in the bay. You know, they've taken all the nutrients out of Lake Michigan. So a lot of fish in their early life cycles aren't getting the zooplankton and the phytoplankton that they need to survive the early life stages. There's a couple other things that the mussels have affected I'll speak to later. But it seems that the nutrients in the bay are sufficient for a lot of different fish to be thriving there that aren't thriving other places. So it's a good thing. And with this concentration of fish in the lower bay, there's not as much spillover to the northern bay as we had hoped and expected, and that's deeper water and it's more spread out and there's less nutrients. So we see some fish there. We don't see what there traditionally was. When I started fishing, you know, there was a healthy perch population in Green Bay. There was chubs in Lake Michigan, which were referred to by some as the backbone of the fishery, because fishing chubs is not easy. You know, it's offshore. The best time to fish them is in the winter when the weather's tough, and but it was always a reliable way that you could augment your income and go out and make a few dollars. And now that the food supply, the pariah that both the whitefish and the chub ate has disappeared, chubs have stopped growing. Some of the sampling that's done shows there's still chubs in the bay, in the lake, I mean, excuse me, but they're not growing. They're just tiny little fish well below any kind of marketable size. So that remains to be seen what'll happen with that. But hopefully they make a comeback. But I don't know if I could put a crew together right now that want to go out chub fishing. People just aren't always willing to work that hard anymore. But back to whitefish, when they moved to the bay, when the zebra mussels first came, the whitefish moved deeper, and the inside of the chub grounds had small whitefish on it. So we fished chub deeper, not to impact the whitefish. But it turned out that it was because of the food that they were moving deeper. And we also suspected that cormorants play a part in that, because in the springtime, when there used to be a lot of fish in the inshore water in the bay, in the lake, excuse me, I keep saying that, thinking North Bay, but we would, on dark and stormy nights, we would get a run of whitefish inshore there. as the fishing was declining and they were moving deeper. So we did a bunch of work in the bay. We sponsored a study to fish our trap nets in deeper water rather successfully. We showed that we could do that and not impact lake trout, which were always concerned that they were protected, and also that we could release those whitefish from that deeper water and they would still swim away. Some fish, excuse me, have an air bladder that can't adjust. The whitefish can handle that coming from the depth and going back down. And we did a 2-year study on that, into that deeper. But just as we finished that, the whitefish declined even more in the lake and started appearing in greater numbers in the bay. So what they also did during that time is they became a piscivore. We never ever saw a whitefish that ate anything except little bits of floating, I don't know what you call it, leaves and grass, and they ate diparia, which was plentiful in the lake. It would just be everywhere, and it fed both the chubs and the whitefish. Well, as the diparia disappeared because of the mussels, the whitefish actually became, first they ate mussels, and we've had different discussions on that. I had some friends out here who saw the whitefish come onto the rock piles and start fighting with the mussels for the diparia. So it eventually whitefish ate the mussels, and it, you know, they didn't get much nutrient out of it. They became skinnier, and you know, it just wasn't what they needed. So they actually adapted and became piscivores, and they started eating other fish. They eat small alewives, they eat gobies, which when gobies came in, we were told that was the end of everything, because gobies ate eggs. And biologists out of Milwaukee saw them on the bass grounds. Well, now, you know, every bass are eating gobies, and we have the greatest bass fishery in the world out here, and the whitefish eat them. So many different things changed. They also adapted to water temperature. We never thought we could catch a whitefish unless the water they were swimming in was in the 40-degree range or colder. And now, what we discovered many years ago is in the lower bay, they come up to feed on the surface in the 70-degree water, and they're living regularly in water that's 55, 58 degrees. So, they've just adapted to that area in the bay that has those conditions, and it's pretty amazing what they've done. We spent a number of years trying to decide how that change should be managed, and eventually, at our suggestion from the fishing board, the DNR did what was apparent, and they started running a model for Green Bay and a model for Lake Michigan. We used to just run a model for Lake Michigan, and all the rest of the fishery kind of was subsets of that, and that's what would decide how much fish we could fish. But when they ran that model, we've managed over the last 8 or 10 years in a very slow process, and we had to do a study to show we weren't, what our bycatch was, and we weren't impacting walleye or any other fish. We were able to raise that quota in the lower bay, so to a sustainable level. We've also, in the last 2 go-rounds, lessened the quota in the lake. And the problem in the lake is that even though we've lessened that quota, it really doesn't affect the fishery, because we weren't fishing the whole quota. You know, we're basically self-regulating. There's just not enough fish that we put a lot of effort out there. My business fishes in the lake. Occasionally
occasionally in the spring, depending on weather conditions. We do set some nets, almost as an assessment in October, but we probably only set a quarter of what we used to set, and we only go in North Bay. We used to fish all the way down to Cape Point and Whitefish Bay. But while we're finishing up in Green Bay, we do that. Our dock in Sand Bay, where a bunch of my neighbors are here today, happy to see them. But from our dock, it's only 5 miles to North Bay, so that's something that we can do. And then we usually, and we have for, I think, 21 of the last 22 years, we set nets back in December. So there is some fish there, and we do see during those periods, particularly in December, we see some young fish. So somewhere there's some fish, that are reproducing in Lake Michigan. We really don't identify. There's been a bunch of studies done using telemetry to tag fish, and there's arrays all over the Great Lakes that this an organization called GLADOS supports, and the researchers that run the graduate program out of UW-Stevens Point work with them. So we actually implant receivers in fish, and then they can track where they are. But it's a slow process because they have to collect those receivers, download them to get it. So fish we tagged last year, we won't know till next year what they did. And I just heard that some of the federal funding for some of that is being cut. So, but it's interesting stuff. I know that last year they tagged some fish in Bay de Noc, and we've always had some back and forth between the stocks in Bay de Noc and the North Moonlight Bay stocks, and they used to mix in Green Bay, but now they think they're coming up and down the lakeshore. So someday we'll know that. But whitefish seem to be good, and running the model last year in the bay, there's actually the DNR numbers said that there were less fish in the bay, but the biomass is not shrinking because the fish are getting bigger and bigger. So there's some concern about recruitment there, but historically, in places where there's been a lot of fishing, you wouldn't see recruitment when the biomass was that big. So it's not quite what it was at the peak 7 or 8 years ago, but it's still a very healthy amount. Spawning success. Spawning success. So they come into the fishery as yearlings. I'll talk a little more about that coming up, but yeah, that's what we're talking, improvement to the fishery. Yeah, good question, thank you. So anyway, that's what's going on there. We're not sure if the department will choose to run the model for the bay again this year, or we'll wait till next year to do it. It's supposed to be on a 2 or 3 year cycle, but with some concerns. And a lot of those concerns came from the sport fishery, who, as you know, have a tremendous success in Green Bay with whitefish under the ice. And when we set those quotas in Green Bay, half of the whitefish were reserved for the sport fish, which didn't seem like they would ever produce that much. And we don't have the numbers yet from this past year. But for 3 years they had no success, but there was no ice. And they could get out there a little bit, but they were going with airboats and going, all different ways. And what I came to believe talking to them is that, the noise level ATVs and airboats and everything, where there's only 3 or 4 inches of ice, had to be tremendous and had to be spooking the fish. And the other thing that, been going on is that there's so much food in that bay and the fish are growing, like I said, you know, they're not as likely to bite on a hook and a line. They're not racing around starving for your artificial worm. So anyway, that's what's going on there. But, this year now with good ice, they had a tremendous year. Yes.
Does the size of the fish, like, does that affect the quality of the meat the fish are eating? Does that have any?
You know, I don't think so. You know, there's some long-lived,
Excuse me, there's some long-lived fish where, you know, build up, you know, older fish is a concern, but, it hasn't happened in whitefish. And they actually, for us, market fish, and particularly a market fish that we ship out of Door County, those larger fish are more valuable. So there's a cut at 3 pounds and at 4 pounds where the price goes up. So, but most of what we use locally are 2 to 3 pounds. So the rest not to be supplying stuff. Anyway, you guys keep making me lose my train of thought here. And that ain't as hard as it used to be. But anyway, that's what's been going on with whitefish, and, you know, we're optimistic. You know, you can't have been in this business as long as I have without being an optimist. You know, and my glass is half full, and it's gaining, it's not going the other way. So, and I've got a tremendous investment. I've got a 34-year-old partner, my son, who intends to fish for a long time. So we're gonna keep doing what we have to do. The other thing is some of the other research we've been doing in Green Bay that this group will find interesting is we've been working with Val Klump, who is the retired dean from the Water Institute at the University of Milwaukee. We're working with Professor Mike Zorn from UWGB, and they've been doing research on the dead zone, the area of hypoxia in Lower Green Bay. So about 3 years ago, we in our trap nets on the south end of what we call Larson Reef, which is leading down by Henderson Point, we got touched with some hypoxia. We had some fish dying in the net. So we immediately shut nets down and started checking water temperatures. And it's not directly related to water temperatures, you know, it's oxygen level. But then last year, working with these two, the previous year we worked with them some, but last year we worked with them and we used a sensor, and we checked 3, 4 of our locations every day. We drop the sensor down, take the readings on oxygen, and do it. And we're planning to do that again. But we also talked with them about putting another buoy. They have a system where they have buoys in the bay that will give you real-time readouts on what the oxygen level is. So we put a 3rd buoy in the bay, right up in the middle of our furthest south nets. And we watch that very carefully, and it's fascinating how those levels change and what changes them. Val is pretty convinced, and I think he's right, is that, you know, we got still water in that upper water column, and it loses its oxygen, and then you get north wind. And you would think that the hypoxia is coming from the south. What he claims, and what we're seeing pretty much validates it, when you get north wind, it'll drive that dead water down to the bottom. So it happens different, but it changes sometimes fairly rapidly, you know. But we're also seeing, and I should have wrote some notes, but you know, I think we often see the oxygen level at 7, which I think is 7%. But, the fish don't seem to react until it's down about 0.5. And I don't think it's deadly to them till it gets almost to 0. So, but what we're trying to use it as an early warning system to avoid any hypoxic incidents, this fish we caught in the net. We also try and lift those nets regularly, but with that warm water, it could kill fish overnight. So pretty important stuff, and extremely interesting. We're also working with Professor Dong Feng Den, who's a nutrition expert. He does a lot of work for aquaculture, and is part of the 100% Great Lakes Fish. The Great Lakes governors and premiers have provided to us. She is using some of our byproducts to create food for aquaculture. So some of the stuff we don't use, that now we use as fertilizer. She's working on. I just wrote a letter of support for a grant she's looking for to expand that program these next couple of years. So we're all about that. And the Great Lakes governors and premiers came up with a program about 3 years ago that they called 100% Whitefish. Well, they modeled it off. There's something in Iceland where they said 100% cod, and they're taking a cod that used to be worth like $12, and by the time they're done with it, they're getting several $1,000s worth of use out of it. They're making collagen products, and they're making all different things. They're making fish leather, they're making jewelry, there's all different things. The difference is that in Iceland, it's a small country, and their fishing food is concentrated in just a couple spots. Now, here on the Great Lakes, we're spread all over. So hasn't been anyone who stepped up and said, I'll build that plant, and I can do all this stuff. And I don't think the government is ever going to reach the point where they're willing to do it. But there's been some fascinating research. So that remains to be seen, and most of the fishers around the Great Lakes have signed up to try and use everything. So we're heavily regulated, the DNR, DATCAP, the Coast Guard, everyone's got a little interest in what we're doing. And we struggle with the DNR because, their agenda is not to promote what we're doing. And we like to say we give everybody in Wisconsin access to that resource. That you can go into a store or a restaurant and eat the fresh fish out here. Well, there's, sport fishing groups who feel threatened, that the guy with the big boat took all the fish, So I'm always happy when their fishing is good because then they are less worried about what I'm doing. But, and I've always said, there's more than enough for all of us. So I'd like to think that's true. But I won't dwell on that because I could get off on a 2-hour tirade. But what I will say is that all the people in the DNR have a sport fishing license. None of them have a commercial license, and they've never commercial fished. So you have
I was just wondering, should there's been a big decrease in the number of commercial fisher people in this part of the state, is that true?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So the management in what I was talking about earlier is I think it was 1977 when they revised some commercial fishing laws, and they created something called limited entry. And then which meant that you had to have certain qualifications. You could not just walk in and say, I want a commercial license. So you had to have an investment, and then you had to show some time. And that's when, shortly after that, is when we started on the quota system. And we went to what's called ITQ, individual transferable quotas, which have been put in place in a lot of places throughout fisheries all over the world. Then in 1988, we put everything that was considered a high value species into a quota system. We had very, very contentious arguments about how they should be allocated, who should get what. And most of what's been done was done on past performance. And then it was even, contention about what years you should use, and, what, use these 4 years, use the last 10 years, what you use. So it was very difficult. At that time, the Commercial Fishing Board had regulatory authority to do these allocations. And then later on, there was concern in state government that industries couldn't regulate themselves. But we had a very contentious debate about what would happen when we transferred that authority to the DNR. And our concern was the DNR thought that you could then just create new quotas. And we were buying and selling, leasing these quota ships. And we transfer them amongst ourselves in what was referred to as either a temporary transfer for the balance of the year or a permanent transfer, which means you bought out this business and you got their share of the quota. And what you got was a percentage of the TAC, the total allowable catch. And it's not guaranteed because the state always had the authority to set the quota. So if you own 10% in a quota of 1 million pounds, you get 100,000. If the quota is 100,000 pounds, you only get 10,000. So there's some variable of that. But we've managed over the years to maintain, that essential. Basically, it's a property right. We for years had to call it the P word. We couldn't say it because people freaked out if you had a property right. So, but it's been used all over. And there were, I think, 13 federal fisheries that adopted that TAC, and they did it the same way we did to start with. And then when they redid the Magnuson-Stevenson Act, which governs the federal fisheries, they put in qualifiers about how, if that quota wasn't used, how it would be recycled, and other things. So we don't have that in our fisheries. So we have fishers who now have control of quota that they can lease and make some money off it without it being fishing. So we invested that right in. So, and not to get too deep into it, but we did not have any quota in southern Green Bay when we started. So we leased quota, and then we had one opportunity to buy some, and we still aggressively lease as much as we can, fish pretty hard. So, but we also own, a large share of the quota in Zone 2, which is the northern bay and the lake, and we own a lot of chub quota. Right now, it has very little value. It's kind of a crapshoot. My friend who was chub fishery, was the top perch fisher out of Milwaukee, was debating what to do, and he went up to Cook Inlet to fish salmon, and moved his family there. And he said, "You guys should pay me not to come fish my whitefish quota and buy more." So both of my fish collapsed. So that's just a brief snapshot of how complicated this is. And what we deal with, to go fishing, so. The other thing that I mentioned that I was gonna mention, and it turned into, the apex predator lake trout. The lake trout saga is just incredible. Ever since the St. Lawrence Seaway opened its flood of invasives, and the lamprey came in and wiped out lake trout in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. We've been trying to get them to reproduce, and they would not do it. For years, the biologists said PCB, but there was no causal effect really linking PCB to it. So there was never anything determined, and we planted millions and millions and millions of lake trout in Lake Michigan. And it was okay because, there was plenty of food for them. It was smelt, it was alewife, and they were there, but they weren't reproducing. So what happened when the alewife collapsed, and no one knows exactly why, but particularly in northern Lake Huron, the alewife collapsed, and lake trout started reproducing. And what was discovered is that there's an enzyme in alewife that inhibits lake trout reproduction. Crazy, all those years of planting. So now, the charter fishermen here in Wisconsin convinced the DNR that they should plant less lake trout because we're really right now managing the lake for an abundance of alewife, because they need the alewife, because that's all the salmon will eat. The salmon won't eat anything else. There's very little of anything else. So right now we're trying to maintain an abundance of alewife. So they convinced them that the silverfish, the salmon, coho, and the rainbow trout were vital to their businesses, so they should not plant trout in Wisconsin, plant way less. So of course the feds and it always says that the DNR has backed this. Well, they've been involved in it, but it's the federal hatcheries that raise lake trout, and that's who does it all. So the fish that Wisconsin refused, they trucked around, and Michigan went and dumped them on the Northern Refuge, which is about 60 miles from my dock up in Sand Bay. So there was no net decline in stocking. It changed. The other thing going on is salmon have started reproducing, and there's natural salmon now in the lake. Rivers with long runs on the Michigan side, salmon are naturally reproducing. So the control that the managers think they have really doesn't exist anymore. So when they decided there were too many lake trout, we raised our hand and said, we could help you with that. That was a staple of the commercial fishery, and one we asked for repeatedly. Even we've talked, push, blow, and take, where we even pay a fee for raising in the hatchery, but never made any traction with that. We've had a couple of instances where we thought we were going to move forward. In fact, the current DNR secretary, which has changed, I think 5 times in the last 4 years, the secretary has, because the state Senate will not confirm any of Governor Evers' appointments to the upper levels of most of state government. So glad you're not there anymore, Rob. Yeah, that's what I meant. Sure you are. But anyway, we've had a couple who seem receptive to the idea, And we actually went so far as they drafted a scope statement, which is the start of a rule process. But the way we've changed state government now, it takes 2.5 years to change a rule. Because you have to have a scope statement, and it has to go to the legislature for approval, and it has to come back to the resources board, then it has to go out, and then you start the rulemaking process. So it's become so cumbersome, and it led to us changing how we change the whitefish, allocation. We're doing that now, just on running the model, and the resources board, input from us. But anyway, it's unfortunate that that's what we got to. But, so we're gonna keep asking for lake trout. Our last ask here was for, 10,000 fish that we could fish in the winter off Door County. And really, it would be a massive assessment project. And the lake is full. Our fishers still try and fish some with gill nets. Don't fish whitefish in the winter because the trout are so hard in the net. And then there's a rule, if you get more than 10% lake trout, you gotta move your nets a certain distance, certain depth. So it's very, it's a big negative. That little bit extra trout would be very helpful. We lost some of our ability to diversify. So just,
I've seen flags out in the ice fishing in Green Bay. Are those nets under ice that I'm seeing?
well, yeah, there's always been ice fishing in these days. In fact, I did a lot of it for a number of years. And, my son did it for 5 years, so 5 or 6 years ago. And we don't have real good ice up here, you know, this past year, maybe we did, and Powell and both our books and,
But if you have ice, how do you get them out of the water?
well, you know, they're gill nets, so you can pull them through a hole.
I see.
Yeah. It's a pretty intricate process, how you say. I'm trying to remember, you know, I'll send it, to the council here, but, there's a video that, public television did with my son and his buddy John, that very clearly explained how to do it. But you run a line with either a long pole or a creeper that go crawl under the ice, 300 feet, and then you pull the net through and you drop it to the bottom. Pretty interesting. It used to be very effective and productive. Anyway, the other thing that I want to talk about is the other effects the mussels have had. And I have some good friends, Zach and Yvonne Draper. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Zach and Yvonne, filmmakers from the Bruce Peninsula in Canada. And they came by us 4 years ago, and they were doing some research and wanted to create a documentary about how poor the fishing is some places and how good it was by us. So they, I thought they were just a couple of starving college kids. You know, we took them out on the boat, and then they came up and hung out at our dock, and they had this ROV, you know, remote operated underwater vehicle. And the first time they put it in the water actually was in our harbor. And then we took them out and took them to a nice dinner and kind of sent them on their way. Well, they created a documentary called All Too Clear. It was shown, a little over a year ago at Crossroads at Big Creek. They came and did a presentation. But they've become pretty well-known researchers. They're doing all different things now. They just did a couple explorations in Lake Superior, where they took their to the deepest part of Lake Superior, working with, researchers up there. They did, some work, last year where they went out, of, Milwaukee with, people from UW Milwaukee to see if they could document some, chub spawning. I really think they were too late in the year if there was any going on to see it. 'Cause that's a pretty unknown thing, how the chub spawn. They did get over the Mid-Lake Refuge where they've been planting lake trout in Wisconsin forever. And what they saw out there was a bunch of big whitefish swimming on top of that reef that comes up, about 100 feet surrounded by 4, 5, 600 feet. So pretty crazy stuff. But they produced this movie, and then it became a 3-part series called All Too Clear. And it was about the effects of the mussels, the aquatic mussels particularly. And they documented a bunch of different research. And there's a researcher in Canada who thinks one of the problems with whitefish recruitment is sunlight penetrating on the larval whitefish and actually causing them to shrivel up. So, and, how much that's an effect everywhere, we don't know, but it's been done. But I haven't seen, any follow-up on that or heard anything about it since they did it. They, there's I forget what they're called, but there's some lakes in Canada where they, do some experimental stuff, and they were actually spreading wastewater in a lake to get nutrients into the lake to revive. It wasn't the cutthroat trout, it was a reddish trout. So I mean, pretty off the wall revolutionary stuff. They also did a little work with the current dean at the Water Institute, who is doing different research about mussels, and he went out and spread tarps over the mussels outside of Milwaukee in deep water and suffocated them. What he did, but what he found is that where he suffocated them, those areas that were clear, they did not recolonize them. Those areas stayed clear. The other thing, and I'll talk about that in a second. The other thing he did, he made a thing he called the fish manager, and it's a big 10-foot wide hunk of steel. And he drug it over mussels to crush them, and with the same effect, that they did not recolonize, they killed them. That's, none of that's practical for all of it. But the interesting thing is, and something that I've mentioned many times, is those mussels have to have a life cycle, a lifespan. And I heard that it might be 15 to 20 years. So we're getting into that period. And these things came from the Baltic and, that area. And they have them, but not at the level that they colonized Lake Michigan. So we're hoping that those are gonna die off. And when they die off, they really release a tremendous amount of energy into the system that could revitalize a lot of these problems. And, even if there's less of them, maybe that water naturally isn't so clear, and we get less of the Cladophora and green algae, or these other things that are vital concern, particularly for environmental people. So again, maybe my rose-colored glasses are a little too bright here, but you'd like to think there's some hope. Yeah. So anyway, I will also get you the information, because recently that All Too Clear movie, it was released on Canadian public television, but it's now available here in the US. So it's just All Too Clear in PBS. It's my So anyway, anybody have any questions or comments?
We have another microphone here, and if you have one, Paul, I don't know if you can set the amplifier
Yeah.
or whatever.
Sure. Okay.
You think, Ontario seeing similar issues?
Well, lesser.
Excuse me. Say hi.
Hi. Hi.
Okay, that's not working. Now,
Hello.
Hey,
Oh, hey, how does it work?
questions?
Jim has. Mhm.
A bunch, but I'll start with one. You were talking about the toxin area or the hypertoxic, hypotoxic, yeah. What is the extent of that? And
It, it moves and it's been there forever. The perch fishermen down there have dealt with it forever and, it's partly why they, don't fish their drop nets. There's other reasons, partly because of how much fish is available to them. But, it varies, but at times I guess it can be, 10 miles in diameter.
and were you saying that there's a connection between the quagga mussels and algae?
Well, I think the clearer water allows algae to grow faster. Yeah, the sunlight penetration. That's not my field of expertise, but I think that's kind of what's going on, right, Paul?
Yeah, that's, I mean, the mussels, and it seems to be more of an issue in Green Bay than in Lake Michigan as far as the clarity of the water, creating more algae, right, creating the Lepidoptera issue on our beaches, with all that sludge of extra algae from the water.
But the water in Lower Green Bay is not nearly as clear as the water in Northern Green Bay or in Lake Michigan. When we were out early this spring pulling some nets, we could see the bottom in 60 feet of water in North Bay, which is unheard of. Out here, what we go by is we have a king line, which is a main anchor line for our trap nets, and we bring that up alongside the boat, turn the boat, and put that across, and then we slide the boat under the net. So we only see that in Green Bay at 6 or 10 feet at the most.
And one last question, what's going on with sturgeon?
Well, sturgeon are thriving. Sturgeon are thriving. We took over a study that the Hickeys from Bailey's Harbor started with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I think now it's been 22 years ago. And they thought that the system in Green Bay had about 300 sturgeon in it. And then over about a year and a half, we tagged 300 sturgeon with electronic tags and Floyd tags, the ones that just hang on their back. And we never had a recapture. So, but sturgeon are fascinating. We used to see them when we'd fish into this time of year in North Bay. We'd see them in the shallow water. And then once in a while, we'd see them starting about. So we handled all these sturgeon with them. We got pretty good at it. But starting about 4 years ago, we started seeing sturgeon outside of Sturgeon Bay. And in the deep water, in 80, 90 feet of water, when they're supposed to be spawning in the river. Well, it turns out what we learned is that sturgeon do not spawn every year, that they spawn every 2 or 3 years. So they're not all in the river. But happens with them is the big sturgeon will, swim into our net, and our net is it's a big set net that, funnels them into a tunnel, into a box, and we pull underneath that box, and we take them out with dip nets, so they're still swimming when we catch them. So, and then we can sort them if it's something we shouldn't keep, or a fish that's too small, we can release it. So it's a great way to fish, and it can be really efficient. You can catch a lot of fish pretty quickly. But, what those sturgeon do is there's mesh that, we call it, 14-inch mesh, so it's a diamond 7 inches on the side. And those sturgeon will just touch it and maybe catch a gill where they, aren't caught, but then they just sit there. We come and lift that net up, and somebody goes out in our skiff, and often they're big enough that we tie a rope around their tail. We need a big rope so it doesn't damage them. We haul them onto the boat, 200-pound sturgeon. They're 6 or 7 feet long. Yeah, and we drive away from our net, release them, and they kind of sit there and swim away. It's fascinating. And we, when we did that study, we put a lot of sturgeon. Some will swim into the net, and we put them in a cow tank. So.
This is putting the sturgeon you made of this spawn, the fox and the wolf rivers?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, and
That's amazing to see.
yeah, and somehow that system is a little separate from the Lake Michigan system, but they're doing a tremendous amount of work. They built an elevator system in the Menominee River to move them up above that first dam, and then they've got like 15 miles of habitat. So now whether they bring them back out of there or they leave them there, I don't know. They've also done a tremendous amount of work with that in Milwaukee. The Milwaukee River now has got a sturgeon population that's being enhanced.
So is it the tribe in the mountain that's working with that?
I don't think the tribe's involved. Yeah, I'm not positive. The group that's doing a lot of research in the Great Lakes and working with some of the tribes is the Nature Conservancy. Yeah, they've really stepped up their work in the Great Lakes.
Charlie, thank you very much for the lecture. First of all, 2 quick questions. Do you feel that the lamprey eels are under control? Because I know in recent years, there have been cutbacks in the treatments along some of the streams in the Great Lakes. That's first question. Second question is PFAS. Is that the issue of PFAS and the concentration of PFAS in fish? Is this affecting you yet, or is that a big unknown?
Well, PFAS, scares the hell out of me, because I don't know, when it's gonna affect, but we haven't seen it in our fish. And, but for some reason, most of these environmental concerns immediately focus on fish. PCBs were as prevalent in livestock as they were in fish, but fish got all bad publicity. Right at the start of PFAS, there was some stuff came out about fish, but then, as we all know, it's everywhere. So it's not particularly in fish. So we haven't seen it to be a real big problem right now.
How about the lamprey eel?
Well, the lamprey control is contentious. The funding for it is constantly under attack. But what they've discovered in 2 different instances, it was a real world experience. Several, I think it was 15 or 20 years ago, they decided that this lampricide, which they were buying from France, I think is where it was made, was too expensive. So they were gonna use traps in the river and control lamprey. Well, it was a total failure and there was a big outbreak of lamprey. Then they got back under control, but, a couple of years ago, well, I probably know which year, but the early 2020, during COVID, they didn't treat for 1 year and there was a uptick. So, lamprey control continuing is a really, really big job. Now, if I was a cynic, I would wonder if this multi-million-dollar lamprey control system only wants control, or should they really be trying to eradicate them? But if they eradicate them, they're all out of work, so. Not that I don't trust government, but you sometimes have to wonder.
Just a comment on the lamprey. Are you guys aware that lamprey are native to Washington State and they're actually protected there? Because they're part of the ecosystem there.
Well, and there's,
It's a different lamprey,
right,
but it is actually actively protected in the waterways there.
they're protected here too. I can't harvest lamprey. I'm not sure why. Well, eels are, I don't know if ours are. I never ate one. I worked with a guy, Mark Weberg, who used to like to take them and hang them on his beard.
Charlie, what's the status of Asian carp? We heard a lot about them in prior years. I haven't heard very much in the last year or so. There's some theory that the lakes are too cold for them. However, with global warming, the bay and the lakes are warming dramatically. And could that be a habitat for Asian carp? And we hear about the barrier in the Chicagoland area, and it's failing or not failing, and we're going to replace it or we're not. What do you know about Asian carp?
Well, I probably know about what you know, and maybe a little more. But the Asian carp, I think, if they got in the right habitat in the Great Lakes, and they need water flow, river water, to reproduce. There's places where maybe they would survive, but I rely on a sea grant expert who was involved in all of that at the beginning, and he said that when they first built those barriers, that they were fairly ineffective, and if those carp wanted to be in Lake Michigan, they would be here. So maybe there's something to it. It's too cold. They've dramatically slowed down their movement north into Mississippi. So it might be that they've reached a point where it's too cold for them. You'd like to hope so.
Just to pull up that on the ballast, on the same one, like, my understanding is the ballast field, you think the folk that invasive coming into the same one, maybe in managed,
My understanding is that Canada has refused that ballast water treatment. They said it would just be too costly and too slow to treat ballast water. So as far as I know right now, I don't think there's, maybe there's a little more care with loading ballast or where they load it or anything like that, but I don't think they've done it. I think the scourge of St. Lawrence continues.
Say, Charlie. Two questions. You mentioned something about some buoys. I'd like to know where they are. Second question, where did in the spring, what that ran in the spring? There used to be a smelt. Whatever happened to the smelt?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know. There's been some resurgence in smelt, where people have actually caught some, I don't think this spring there was a big smelt run, but, they were actually catching them off the piers in Milwaukee. I know, one of the guys that, worked with me for several years, his dad and his buddy would sit inside the harbor down at the stone quarry and fish them hook and line. I know that 2 years ago, the, trawler, which is another thing I'm not happy about, that operates out of Cedar River, caught a bunch of smelt in Green Bay. So, they're not coming in the rivers. And, you know, one of the things that the commercial fishery thought, when they first stopped coming in the rivers, is they planted all these fish, you know, the rainbows, the brown trout, things that want to be in the rivers in the spring. So maybe the smelt decided they didn't want to be there. I don't know. I don't have a clear answer.
Where are the buoys located? You said there was 3 buoys, one southern, is there one in, up here?
Oh, the
For the temperature of the lake?
for the oxygen level. The furthest north one is about off of Henderson Point. And then there's one about 6 miles further south and another one about 5 miles down the bay.
Where is Henderson Point?
Henderson Point is, the south end of, Little Sturgeon. But it's offshore, it's called Seagull. And, I'll also send Mike the, information about where the water is at.
Charlie, is there any, thing that eats quagga or, zebra mussels? Is there any natural predators?
Not that I'm aware of.
I have 2 quick questions. You mentioned perch just briefly in the beginning of your talk, but I'm just wondering what the perch population is and where the perch comes for our beloved Friday night perch fries. And my second question is, I love your shirt and I want to know, do you sell those at your retail store?
No.
Excellent.
And they're extremely comfortable. So perch, interesting because, perch have had a bit of a resurgence in Green Bay. And the hook and line fishery has done amazingly well. The commercial guys that fish southern Green Bay, Swamico in that area, are doing extremely well this spring, better than they've done this spring for quite a while. But in general, that perch population isn't what's supplying northeast Wisconsin. Even, well, you know, what I hear is that even back in the late 60s and early 70s, I guess, when they were producing 1 million pounds of perch in southern Green Bay, there was still perch imported to northeast Wisconsin. That's how much perch we get. So, but I do a lot of business with a big company in Wheatley, Ontario, which is just up the coast from Detroit. And they're very reputable people I've dealt with for 35 years. And they have, I think they have about 35 boats that fish for them on Lake Erie. But they will buy any whitefish that I don't use locally or sell. They will. We have a common carrier comes in twice a week and we'll haul to them and they'll take any amount. So they've been very good to us. But I actually talked to them today about perch, and perch have failed on the Canadian side of Lake Erie, and that's where our perch come from. So what prompted that call is I had a message from a restaurant owner who uses 300 pounds of perch, and it's where everyone wants to go on Friday night. So I'm not naming any names, but they're having a tremendously difficult time getting perch, and they buy through a company in Green Bay that used to process a lot of fish, but they're having trouble getting perch. And they told me that, they don't know that, they had 21 boats out one day last week, and between the 21 boats, they brought them 1,200 pounds of perch. So you know, and this stuff goes in cycles, so who knows? And, the walleye that were down for a while in Lake Erie have been up the last couple of years. So, maybe that had an effect, but, I'm not, you know, we deal with just very minimal amount of perch, so it's not my deal. Yeah. I love to eat them. They're almost as good as whitefish.
Almost, yeah.
Sure.
Last summer we had, beaches closed for E. coli quite a few times over the course of the summer, and a little less the summer before that, I recall. I don't know if it's on the E. coli is on the rise, these numbers in the lakes on the rise, if it's related to the hypoxia you talked about. Should we be worried about E. coli in the water? Is this a small blip? Has it always been with us?
I don't think it's always been with us, but, you know, we've never had a testing program like this before. But, you know, a lot of the blame, comes, from birds in that shallow water. And the bird that we're seeing in massive numbers now are the pelicans, those white pelicans. So, but I haven't seen this year that, the beach closings are as great as they've been other years, but the last 2 or 3 years in June, you know, the water's already been in the 70s, and it's, you know, mid 60s right now.
Does the E. coli affect your fishing?
No. Well, you know, interestingly enough, you know, the way we release the fish, we've always tried to get them back in the water quickly and release them close to the boat. And we've got an anchor line going out alongside where we're letting them go. So we've always, been careful for, you know, seagulls. We don't want seagulls grabbing those fish if they take a second to swim down. But what happened, when the pelicans started showing up a few years ago, is the pelicans almost herd the seagulls, and they push them closer to us. And if that seagull grabs something, they grab it right away from them. So it's, yeah, and, somebody had told me that's how pelicans hunt in shallow water. And this year, well, last year, we moved down and fixed up a building at our dock, and my wife and I live there now. So last week, right about this time of night, as it started to get dark, we had all kinds of seagulls in the harbor, which I never was there at night much, but I was there last spring. And after they're there, then the pelicans come in and they're swimming, and there are 2 or 3 of them, and they seem like they're following something. So I'm not an expert on pelicans, but that's what I've observed. But there's more and more and more every year. Yeah. I mentioned cormorants, you know, earlier too, and you know, as those of us who've been on the lake shore over here, the cormorants used to come out of the Mink River, and you know, the sky would turn black. There would just be huge amounts of them. So there may be a few less now, but a group called the Washington Island Sportsman's Club has been working very hard to get some cormorant control in up by the island, and they think it's drastically affected their fishing. So I was invited to a meeting there a couple of years ago, and I had people from Fish and Wildlife from the main office in Minneapolis came. And when they agreed several years ago, probably 10 or 15, to do cormorant control, and they let APHIS and the DNR wardens actually shoot cormorants, because you can't get close enough to shoot them with a shotgun. You gotta shoot them with a rifle, is what I was told. But then they oiled eggs out on, Adventure Island, some of the islands outside of here. And, at the last minute, the regional director said, well, we need someplace where we're not controlling them. So they said that Pilot Island, Spider Island, and Gravel Island, right outside of us and the Mink River, would be where they didn't do any control. So they're thick there. I've never heard a report, but I can't imagine those, some of those wilderness campsites in Newport Park, there's gotta be nights where it's terrible, the stench. I know driving by them in the boat sometimes, you smell them, and you know, they've destroyed Pilot Island. And it was, in a meeting, they were asked, well, you know, there's people who've gotten sick trying to scuba dive by Pilot Island on those wrecks there. And they said, oh, but as soon as it's a little bit away, it dissipates. So, and then here's an interesting thing. So nobody was real happy. We're all riding back on the ferry. So to break the tension, I said, come on, I'll introduce you to the ferry captain. And Joel Henriksen, I don't, many of you might know him. He was on the county board for a long time. But Joel was running the ferry. And it come up in the, I'm struggling with names, the aide to our congressman at the time, it was before Tony Weed, it was, I lost his name.
Whipple or Gallagher.
Yeah, and, so his aide actually came to the meeting, and she said, well, you got some gripes about the federal government? And Joel went off on how their new boat, because of the tier laws about exhaust, they had to put a lower horsepower engine in than they wanted to, and then brand new boat they were building, the Madonna, and because of air pollution. And we all started laughing and said, won't that dissipate? And she thought it was funny that the Fish and Wildlife people did not. So supposedly they're gonna review that when they redo their plan this year, so hopefully get some more control. Anything else?
I just had a question on what is the, any kind of hypothesis of why, when you kill off the quags in a certain area with either blanketing and, you know, suffocating them or crushing them, they don't repopulate? Is this some assumption they're releasing some kind of a toxin? Because in Chicago, they've been poisoning them for years in their waterways and they, you know, in the water intakes,
Right.
and they keep coming back. So
I can't,
what's different?
I can't speak to that.
Okay.
I just, you know, and by, you know, that was a year ago. By now they may have. killed him.
Now they may have repopulated.
I don't know
Okay.
if he's been out there yet, but we're hoping their life cycle's gonna get there.
It's about 8:25, and I know Charlie's been standing there for about an hour and a half now. And I suppose he's gonna get up in a few hours and go back to work. I looked to see if there were questions online. I didn't see any at the time, so I think if it's okay with everybody, maybe we should wrap it up, Charlie, and,
Okay.
so.
Well,
Thank you, everybody.
thank you. Yeah, thank you all for coming.